afraid. They're cowering in fear to say these things in public, but we'll go there. I'm Chris Spags, joined as always by the top DFS player in the world, the namesake of this YouTube channel and website, Osmo.com, Alex Osmo Baker. How are you doing, Alex?
Doing great, man. It's really shaping up to be a really interesting week here, where guys you might not expect to be popular are kind of the chalk plays of the week, and as contrarian players, and especially with the theme of the show, I think it should be really interesting because maybe the guys you expect to be kind of chalky this week might be a little sneaky.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about all the chalk as we go, and there's going to be some interesting ones to hit on. And one guy who's going to help us dig through it all is a man who's over at 4for4, one of the better NFL analyst sites out there, the director of DFS over at 4for4 Football, TJ Hernandez. How are you doing, TJ?
Good, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk this slate. Like you guys said, it's going to be an interesting one. Ownership is converging on some players that I don't like, so we should have some fun.
A good week to be contrary then. And also, you told us right before we came on the air, and I'm going to bring it to the people because this is a fun fact. I'm sure you've mentioned it in your other content, but you have a history with Marshawn Lynch. You're a Cal guy. And Marshawn, I want to give you all the tout love already. TJ, you're my contrarian pick for the week. What did you do with Marshawn Lynch that the people should know to give you more credibility in the football space?
Grew up in the Bay Area, played against Marshawn in high school. Our claim to fame, only high school in Marshawn's career to hold him under 100 yards.
Legitimately blew my mind with that. That is the most impressive thing. Alex, you've won tens of millions of dollars doing this. I might be rounding up a little bit there. I'm more impressed by TJ impressing Marshawn Lynch in a game, even from getting to Skittles. So good job by you, TJ.
I'm more impressed too. I mean, like Marshawn Lynch, 100 yards, like that's a lock. So,
dude, he was a grown man in high school already. We just we had a good day, I guess.
I'm pretty sure no one.
You and I would combine to get, I think, 1,000 yards against Marshawn. That would be the way it would work. So good job by TJ. TJ, let's talk real fast about 4for4 Football because it is a really great site, one that I've enjoyed for years. You have a lot of smart guys over there. So just tell us real fast because it's getting to be a more crowded space with some of the newer sites out there doing the advanced analytics, doing the football-focused advanced analytics. What do you guys do at 4for4 that you feel like differentiates you as a site?
Yeah, I think probably the thing that stands out the most is just the accuracy of our projections. John Paulson runs our projections. That obviously feeds all of our DFS tools, lineup generator and whatnot. So John Paulson's been consistently in the top 5 going on almost 10 years now. So when you have those accurate projections, it's really going to obviously just help all your content across the board. And then we're one of the few sites that focus specifically on football. So everything that we do, everybody that we have is very football driven. So whereas some people just have to spread themselves a little bit thin, we get to just kind of hammer down for football season and really focus. So I think it helps our content and our tools a lot. It gives us some time to step back in the off season and readjust things. And it makes for a really great product when the season comes.
Yeah, 4for4 is a great site, so go check that out right now. Go follow at TJ Hernandez on Twitter. You can see all the content that's coming out through there. TJ does a good job promoting all the things that are going on the site right now, but it definitely one that I've been following for a few years, so I'm glad to have you on board. And also, we talked about the edge in DFS, and there's one show right now, or one sponsor of this show, that is always going to give you an edge in DFS, and that is FantasyDraft. So right now, head over to FantasyDraft.com. Use the promo code OSMO. You'll get 7 days free over there. Your entry into the world of break-free DFS. Hooters' main event is their big tournament coming off every Sunday. $250K their prize pool, and all the contest entry fees go to the winners. So go to FantasyDraft.com right now and use that promo code OSMO. And Alex, you know it's that time of the week. You pay a ton of rake across the sites, across a bunch of different sports. Well, how many wings have you bought this week with your fantasy draft savings?
I mean, so my winnings in fantasy draft weren't as high last week. I took a rough one. So I think I had a winnings of $360. So that would have been 360 Hooters wings. But the thing is, when you cash, you get more money on fantasy draft. So they don't charge that 10%. So really, on another site, I would have only made like $330 or something like that. So the net gain was 30 wings.
That's how we'd like to calculate things here on this YouTube channel. Everything is based on wings here, but of course, go check out FantasyDraft.com. They do help us put the show on every week. They do a great job over there. And for a lot of you players out there, there can be a difference between being a profitable player and a losing player is paying that rake. So go to FantasyDraft.com and use that promo code OSMO. All right, guys, let's get into the slate here, and we got to hit on the chalk game du jour, starting with Atlanta at Carolina. Atlanta mostly shut down New Orleans last week. Michael Thomas still got off, but the rest of that New Orleans team suffered quite a bit. Atlanta was coming off a bye, maybe a bit of a dead cat bounce for them, but still a spot where they did perform well. Now they get another chalk team going against them. Atlanta's defense on the year has been looking terrible. Alex, I'm going to ask you first here. Is there concern for you at all that Atlanta could upset this Carolina lineup, who's going to have ownership on literally every starter they have at a skill position?
Absolutely, man. I think that Atlanta, they're pretty good at passing the ball. I mean, Matt Ryan's always hovering near 8 yards per attempt year after year. And they have some really great receivers like Julio Jones, Russell Gage kind of being in the mix now, and also Calvin Ridley. So a lot of appealing fantasy options on both sides of the ball here.
TJ, how are you feeling about this spot? And I guess, do you think there's any risk at all with Atlanta maybe have figured something out? I mean, going against the Saints seems like that would be a tougher matchup than going against Carolina, given that Carolina, you can kind of predict what they're trying to do. I guess my just fear is that Atlanta might have figured something out in that bye week. But is there anything that you've seen that would give you some pause loading up on Carolina going against Atlanta?
I think that if what we saw last week from Atlanta, like one thing they haven't been able to do all year is get after the quarterback. I think they ended up with like 7 or 8 sacks against Drew Brees, and New Orleans has actually been one of the best teams at protecting the passer. So I actually think that was a little bit fluky. But in terms of them upsetting Carolina, like I'm not projecting the game in that way. I'm not going to go like build a lineup that projects Atlanta to be in a positive game script, but I think it is a really good game to stack, and ownership's going to reflect that. Brian Hill obviously going to be very chalky just because he's affordable with, and then Ito Smith and Devontae Freeman out. But I like stacking both sides of this game. DJ Moore and Julio Jones both seen a ton of their team's targets. They're actually, it's really interesting if we look, they're playing against each other, and they both have 4 straight games of 9 targets and no touchdowns. That's only happened 10 other times in the last 3 years. So something has to give. Either they're not going to keep getting their volume, or they need to find that end zone with that volume. And DJ Moore hasn't been getting the usage that would suggest that he's going to be a big scorer, but Julio definitely can. So Julio started the season off really strong, especially the touchdown column for Julio, and then he's seen that volume that hasn't turned into scores. So I like Julio in the Atlanta passing game a lot in this one because so many people are going to be on the Carolina side of it.
So let's talk about the Atlanta side first, because I think the Carolina guys are so well owned. We should probably go bit by bit with them. But Alex, I'll ask you about Atlanta since CJ went there first. Julio Jones, his price is down quite a bit, and as CJ mentioned, hasn't been getting into the end zone as much. But still a player he's Julio Jones. He's priced down. Going against a tough Carolina secondary who's not giving up much production, just 6.2 yards per pass on the year. But still, it's Julio, and that's all that matters. Russell Gage also cheap. And then we do have the chalky Brian Hill, will be very highly owned, but saw 20 carries and 2 targets last week, so he should be getting that good workload. Going against Carolina's run defense, which has been pretty bad, giving up 5.2 yards per rush, almost 140 rushing yards a game. So, Alex, where are you going with Atlanta side here, and which guys would you want the most out of this Falcons team on the road?
So I think the Atlanta situation is pretty appealing because Mohamed Sanu got traded a few weeks back, and now Austin Hooper's out, so a lot of the guys that kind of getting targeted a lot aren't in the rotation now. So that's making guys like Luke Stocker and Jaden Graham kind of be the tight ends. I don't think they're going to be getting as many targets as Hooper. So those targets are going to have to go to some other guys. I kind of like Russell Gage because he's kind of getting a lot of short passes. I think with less tight end targets, more might go to him. And then, of course, Calvin Ridley and Julio, very productive players. So I think I'm going to be on Matt Ryan a ton here just because Atlanta throws the ball so much. They only rush about 1/3 of the time. And that gives you that kind of variance you need to take down a big tournament.
We should talk a little bit more about Russell Gage because you mentioned the shorter targets there, and he is going to be a guy that people go to as value. He's seen more targets in the last few weeks, has been running out of the slot since Mohamed Sanu got traded, as you mentioned. So Gage, as a value play, do you feel like he has GPP upside? Because, I mean, the projection for him isn't the best, but in terms of value, he's probably going to be coming up a lot in optimizations on Fantasy Cruncher and all the other sites. So, Alex, how comfortable do you feel with Gage, projected for 14% ownership right now in DraftKings?
So one stat I like to look at is the number of targets versus the number of routes that guy runs. So far, Gage has gotten 22 targets on 125 routes, so that's That's pretty good. I mean, it's about 18% of the time he's out there on the field, he's getting targeted. And that for his price point of 3.3K on DraftKings, 5.3 on FanDuel, I mean, that is just way too low for a guy that could see that many targets.
TJ, do you have any lean with Russell Gage here? Because we talked a little bit about Julio and the reasons why there, but just want to make sure we cover him about as fully as we can, because I know he's going to be coming up a lot for people. Would you feel comfortable going with Russell Gage, knowing that he's going to be pretty decently owned, but he's also near minimum price?
Yeah, that's the one pause for me is if I get like a pretty high owned cheap wide receiver. That's usually where I want to differentiate myself with the high variance plays. So if he does start trending towards like 15%, then I'm probably not going to end up being like overweight on him. But like I said, I just do like that side of the game. So in my game stacks, I'll probably have him. So I'll probably end up being something like even with the field because he'll end up in my game stacks. But you mentioned the slot. Like Carolina's secondary is very good. If they do have a weak spot, it is Javion Elliott. He ranks in the bottom third of the league in fantasy points per target allowed. So Gage does have a little bit of upside against Elliott there.
Yeah, I think that checks out. And I'll be playing some Gage this week, even though it definitely makes me uncomfortable, but the usage has been there, and I guess we made the case for him about as best we can. Let's talk more about Brian Hill, who currently looks to be the chalk play of the week. His ownership has gone up quite a bit throughout the week. We have him over 40%. People, we talked about it last week, chasing the Jalen Samuels game with Ronald Jones. That paid off. Now we have 2 straight weeks of these 4K priced running backs on DraftKings going off. They're also comparably low priced everywhere. So where's our comfort level with Brian Hill? TJ, I'll ask you first, because to me, it does look like a good spot. Carolina's run defense really much weaker than the secondary, but Hill is not a great player. He's kind of just a guy, but just a guy seeing 20 touches can definitely get there. He's not Kalen Balazs, so he's got that going for him.
Yeah, Carolina, they're the most obvious run funnel according to 4for4 metrics. If we adjust for strength of schedule, they rank 5th against quarterbacks, 5th against quarterbacks, 29th against running backs. And I'm usually not the spot that I'm looking to fade is the low price running back. We can project volume pretty confidently, and that's going to take care of the low salary. So you don't need him to go crazy to hit. You obviously want him to in tournaments, but he's going to get you to some studs that you want to get to. Obviously, the concern there is he saw 20 carries last week, only 61 yards, and Atlanta does pass at the highest rate in neutral game script. But like I said, it's just a volume versus price thing, and I don't think that's a spot to get cute.
Alex, how are you shaking out with Brian Hill? And for what it's worth, he has gotten a receiving touchdown in the year, has been a little bit involved in the pass game. Maybe not as involved as Devonta Freeman is every week, but still a nice play overall in that perspective. So where are you shaking out with Brian Hill as the chalk play of the week, whose ownership is soaring by the day?
Yeah, I'm surprised that it's that high at 14%, or I mean at 40%. That's insane. I think that if we look at the last game, it kind of gives some insight. So Devonta Freeman only played 30 snaps. He was injured midway through the game. And then Brian Hill came in and played 38 snaps, ran 21 times, and Barner, he played 10 snaps, but 8 of those were passing plays. So what my assumption is, I mean, how you grade Brian Hill is going to depend a ton on what you think this workload is going to break down and be. And I think Kenjon Barner, based on this, may be getting a lot of the passing down work, which is unusual because, I mean, he's not the greatest historically in that area. But just going off that one-game sample, it seems like Atlanta's tendency is to kind of have a 60-40 split between the running backs, so that's kind of what I'm expecting here. And for Brian Hill's price, it makes him a great play, but maybe not one I'm more enthusiastic about than 40%.
Where do you shake out relative? And this is kind of a tough, not an apples to apples comparison because every slate is different. But if we were going to compare him to the Ronald Jones chalk, and which ended up a little bit less chalky than it would have seemed, and the Jalen Samuels chalk, if you had to rank those spots, where would you put Brian Hill in that trio?
I think Jalen Samuels is a great comparison because what we saw in that game is Trey Edmonds ended up getting a lot more work than we anticipated. And I think that could be a situation that could happen this week. I mean, I think Brian Hill's still a great play based on the price, but it is pretty likely that he's going to be out there maybe 2/3 of the time. And I mean, that makes a great play at the price. That's all I can really say.
TJ, if you wanted to rank those 3 spots that we've had in the last few weeks, how would you rank Brian Hill amidst those guys?
I actually like Brian Hill the most out of those plays so far. I was surprised by the Rojo chalk last week. It obviously paid off. but just because Tampa Bay's such a pass-heavy team and so much of that offense is concentrated through Godwin and Mike Evans, I actually think that was like a top 5% outcome for Rojo. If we ran that 100 times, I don't think it comes out where he gets 8 targets. And then, like Alex said, that Jalen Samuels spot, we ended up seeing get a little less work than we thought. So Brian Hill, if he does get 2/3 of the work in this game, in this offense, that's still a really high share in what should be a really high scoring game.
Yeah, and also we saw the risk with Ronald Jones last week. Like, he had the great game, but once he fumbled, he was out, and that happened later in the game. So yeah, I would put Hill, I think, is pretty close to me with Jalen Samuels. And Jones, I was under the field. I actually ended up with the field because he ended up a little bit lower than we had him projected initially, but just seemed like a riskier play. And I think Hill, the workload will be there, so we'll see. But I'm heavily making my case for Hill this week, and with my lineups, and we'll see how that blows up in my face. Onto the Carolina side, a little bit more, some depth here. DJ Moore getting a ton of targets. TJ talked a little bit about him. Christian McCaffrey's price has stayed flat going against an Atlanta defense, which has been pretty decent on paper against the run. Definitely not good versus the pass, but only given up 3.8 yards per rush so far on the year. Not a bad run defense grade from PFF either. And then we also have a chalky Greg Olsen and a chalky Curtis Samuels, both guys getting well targeted. Olsen having one of his better games last week. And Samuel still getting a good amount of workload, not as much as DJ Moore, but getting a comparable amount of deep targets. So, TJ, I'll ask you first here. If you had to choose one of these receivers, one of these skill position players, actually, no, let's say two, because that's what the stack usually is, a two-man stack. McCaffrey, Moore, Samuel, and Olsen. Which of those two guys would you want the most? And I'll include McCaffrey in there because the price is a consideration.
Yeah, McCaffrey's like the really interesting one for me, just because I want to see how people are going to jam that price into their lineup. So the thing about McCaffrey is, like, you're gonna have to get really creative at some of the other positions, but he gets so much of the offense that he's going. If I'm stacking that side of it, it's going to be him. And at the beginning of the week, it would have been DJ Moore, but his ownership's trending so high, even though the volume is there. Like, he isn't seeing a lot of end zone targets. He isn't getting the deep targets, and Atlanta actually allows a lot of deep completions. So I think if I'm picking two, it's probably Christian McCaffrey and Curtis Samuel. I'm never really a fan of a chalk tight end, just because it's such a high volatile position, and this week, like, all of the good tight ends aren't on the main slate, so I think it's a really good week to go contrarian at tight end. I don't want like a 15% Greg Olsen, really.
Alex, how would you do it if you were going to take two of these four main Panthers here, are going to have a ton of ownership? Which would be your preferred guys?
So in the context of a stack where maybe I have Kyle and Allen, I would tend to maybe stack him with Moore and Olsen, I think. I'm a little hesitant to throw in McCaffrey in with my stack, because you're paying for a lot of salary that's not correlated with your quarterback. And that's a little bit of a disadvantage compared to some other stacks you might have, whereas Moore and Olsen, obviously, you get 100% of that work to Kyle Allen's totals as well. Moore is kind of the guy I'm really looking at. His salary's gone up, but he's been getting a ton of targets. Hasn't really been getting the touchdowns this year, but I mean, that could be as much luck as anything. And he's pretty cheap, especially on FantasyDraft at 11,000. It's about 5.5K on DraftKings equivalent. I mean, that's way too low for a spot where the team has a 27 projected total, and this guy is getting, nine targets a game.
Yeah, his price has not come up a lot, and he was a great play last week at his price point. Took a little bit of a jump there, but still a nice spot for DJ Moore. So this is the game of the week in terms of ownership. So, hopefully these takes help guide you guys through. And guys, hit that like button as well. We appreciate the support a bunch. Helps us bump up the algorithms, get this seen by more people. So just hit that like button if you are in the video, whether you're watching it live or after the fact. All right, let's keep going here. Another game, shockingly, the highest total. We talked about this a little bit before we came on the air. Cincinnati at Oakland. Cincinnati is a really poor defense, but Oakland is the highest implied total of the main slate, 30 points for them. Derek Carr going to have some ownership. He does project fairly well. Has not cracked 24 fantasy points on the year. Has not meaningfully exceeded that so far. But he's going to be pretty well owned. Josh Jacobs looks like a really great play going against the bad Cincinnati run defense. Not anybody who should be taking that workload from him, and he has had the ability to put up monster games, seeing over 20 touches a game. And Darren Waller also being pretty chalky as a pass game option there, but he's had 3 down weeks in a row, and maybe not as useful when Oakland isn't playing from behind based upon what I was looking at. So, TJ, I'll ask you first here. The Raiders Which Raiders are you going to land on the most this week? And are you willing to go to Derek Carr as your quarterback in this really shockingly high total game?
No, it's really just Josh Jacobs for me. I'm not messing with the Oakland passing game at all. I was really as surprised as you guys when I saw the implied total. I kind of made a joke on my podcast this week that I never thought we would see the Raiders have the highest implied point total in 2019. But here we are. I get it. Cincinnati's a really bad team and bad defense all around. But Oakland, they run at one of the highest rates in the league, third highest in neutral game script. And then if we expect them to be in a game script that Vegas is suggesting 10-point, then if Derek Carr or the passing game at all faces touchdown variance, if it ends up they get up by 2 touchdowns on the back of a couple Josh Jacobs touchdowns, then they're not going to be throwing at all. So Derek Carr, like you said, hasn't hit 24 fantasy points. Only went over 20 fantasy points once all year. Hasn't hit 300 yards this year. And then the passing game, Darren Waller has actually seen his target share decline since Tyrell Williams came back from injury. Hunter Renfrow is kind of emerging a little bit as a nice slot play. So we've seen spread out targets in that offense. So I'm really just on Josh Jacobs and no one else on this side.
Yeah, I think I'm a little more on your side, but Alex, I know you have Waller projected as one of your better tight ends, and I do tend to default to your projections because they are your projections you get this year, by the way. If you are playing the NFL with us at osmo.com/join, use that promo code Contrarian to get half off your first month and get Alex's own personal projections. But where are you shaking out with this passing attack, Alex? Because Derek Carr is projecting pretty well for you, Waller projecting well, and we know Josh Jacobs looks like a great play. So where are you going here on this Oakland offense?
Yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs is a tremendous play for all the reasons TJ mentioned here. I think I am a little higher on Darren Waller. I mean, on the season, he's been targeted almost a quarter of the time when he's been running a route. He plays high volume for the position, is efficient with his targets. He hasn't been targeted that much in the last 3 games, and the game log's pretty ugly. He also hasn't been getting a ton of touchdowns, only 3 on the year for 600 yards, which is well below, where he should be if all else was equal. So I think that his price tag may be down a little bit from the past 3 weeks. I'm buying low here.
So here's my concern for Waller, and I'll just lay it out because the 2 games that he really had the outlier games, he had 34.6 fantasy points against Green Bay, where they were trailing behind in that one. They lost that one 42-24. The other big game, he had 30.1 fantasy points against Minnesota. Again, a game where they were getting rocked. They lost that one 34-14. Alex, when you're looking at the stuff, does that answer the equation at all? Because I know if you look at the data overall, you see the preponderance of targets, you see the target share in general. But the fact that a lot of those targets are coming in situations where they're down, where Williams was banged up or out of the lineup, does that consider to you at all? Does that rank for you at all when you're going through your process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to kind of take everything into account. But this guy is still getting targeted at an elite rate. So I'm happy to buy at this mid-level price here. Definitely with any receiver play in football, like there's a big chance of a bust. Compared to the alternative tight ends, I think he's probably one of the safer ones.
Okay, that makes sense. We should talk the Cincinnati side a little bit because Joe Mixon last week saw 30 carries, maybe trying to take the onus off of old Ryan Finley in that backfield. And that was against Baltimore, a team who's not stellar against the run, but does blitz at a high rate and does seem like a game script where they shouldn't have been running as much with Mixon. Is he a guy who jumps out to you at all, Alex? Because that's price is still pretty low for him. And if he's going to get 30 touches, it's going to be hard for him not to get some production against Oakland's defense.
Yeah, I mean, that's shocking that he ran 30 times in a game where they weren't even close to winning it. So if that will happen this week, I mean, just lock and load Joe Mixon. It's hard to really predict that the Bengals won't try to win this game, though. So being a little bit more cautious approaching Mixon. So I really don't know what to make of that 30 rushing attempt performance. Maybe you guys have more insight here.
TJ, what are you thinking about it? What are you thinking about Mixon and also your favorite quarterback? I'll put you on completely on the spot, Ryan. Where are you shaking out with this Oakland offense? But start with Mixon because that, again, the preponderance of volume, and we talked about volume being the key.
Yeah, I think that's probably an outlier. I don't know how the hell he gets to 30 touches in that game. Cincinnati for the season, they pass at the second highest rate in neutral game scripts, so not even when they're trailing. So when you add on to it the fact that they should be down big in this one, I don't think we see a repeat of that one. If you're going to attack Oakland or have success against them, it's through the air. Their secondary is one of the worst in the league. They allow the most fantasy points per pass attempt to opposing quarterbacks. So I think when you look at Tyler Boyd's volume, when you look at Adam Tate, who's actually second in the league in red zone targets over the last 6 weeks, you can make a case for stacking the Cincinnati passing game side of it just because Oakland's secondary is so bad and because they are going to be chalk. So you're kind of leveraging that chalk Oakland side of it with the Cincinnati passing game. The thing about it is they're going to be so cheap that it's going to let you get to some of those like Christian McCaffrey type plays if you play Ryan Finley, and he's going to be so low owned that if you're running 100 lineups, like you really only need 4 or 5 to be overweight on the field. So it's not going to be the cornerstone of my week, but I think it's worth throwing a dart on that side of it.
Yeah, look, I agree with you, TJ, because which Alex was surprised by, but with Alex's own projections, I ended up with 5 quarterbacks who came up in the first crunch I ran with the group set and all that. Ryan Finley did come up for me with Tyler Boyd and with Alex Erickson. So, Alex, I'll throw it back to you. The projections maybe not fully aligned with where your headspace is with Ryan Finley, but you imagine you'll have any Ryan Finley this week, given that Oakland's defense isn't good and they should be trailing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Oakland's pass defense has been well below average, so that's pretty encouraging. Tyler Boyd has been getting a ton of targets, Auden Tate, Alex Erickson as well. Alex Erickson, I think, was banged up a little bit last game, so he didn't finish the game. So if you're just looking at the box score, it won't look quite as good, but he's been targeted at a high rate when he's on the field. And these guys are really cheap, as CJ mentioned, so I'm pretty interested in all 3 of them. And there's an old saying, if you like the wide receivers, then you got to put the quarterback on it. So, because the quarterback...
Is that an old saying?
Yeah, I think it was like Confucius or something. So, I mean, if I like Alex Erickson, Tate, and Boyd, and I have maybe 2 of those guys, then you got to really start thinking about Finley because the quarterback's production is obviously the sum of the wide receivers.
Yeah, Oakland giving up a 7.6% passing TD rate, a good 9.5 air yards per target, which, by the way, shout out airyards.com, salvaging themselves, still giving free data to everybody. So Josh Hermsmeyer, one of our On the Contrary alums, but glad to have them back in our lives. But yeah, the Oakland passing defense has been really bad. So maybe Ryan Finley has some upside. Did not look great in his first start. Also looked like a real check down artist in that first start, but we'll see how he does moving forward. Let's keep it going here. New Orleans at Tampa Bay. So Michael Thomas's price is now up to Christian McCaffrey levels. He's had 2 straight games over 30 fantasy points. He also went for 44 fantasy points versus Tampa Bay in week 6. So the first question I want to ask you here, Alex, because again, I'm not to keep referencing your projection because I feel like I'm spoiling what you might think, but Michael Thomas came up a lot for me, even though his price is elevated more than McCaffrey. And I think that's an interesting thing. And we know Tampa Bay's pass defense just brutal, giving up almost 300 passing yards per game. One of the worst mark in the league right now. So where are you shaking out with Michael Thomas as a pretty chalky play with his price up going against Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to love Michael Thomas this week. He's been averaging more than 100 yards a game, which is exceptional. The matchup, as you mentioned, is good. And Tampa Bay's offense can do something in this game probably and keep Breeze throwing the ball at least enough to get Thomas a high total. So the one caveat I'll make is that there's so much variance with wide receiver results in general that if he's going to be really heavily owned, then it might make sense to just take some lower owned guys simply for the sake of the variance involved in these outcomes.
Would you take lower owned guys for New Orleans? Because we saw Jared Cook's targets have been up a little bit in that last game with Drew Brees. Ted Ginn, mostly still just a garbage player, but still running deep routes and did drop a couple of deep passes in that last game and certainly can get open against Tampa Bay. So would you load up, maybe do a Brees stack without Thomas? Is that a tournament move that you might consider?
I mean, I'm not super enthusiastic about stacking him without his highest targets guy. Like that seems like a contrarian move. So I mean, there's some merit to it. I do like Jared Cook, especially on DraftKings and FantasyDraft where his salary is low. He projects pretty well against this Tampa Bay defense, and Kamara could be a good option as well. Obviously, he disappointed a lot last week, and maybe people will be down on him this week.
TJ, how are you feeling about this New Orleans attack? And I guess Kamara as well. Take me through everybody because we talked about Thomas. You haven't had your chance to chime in there. But Kamara, too, his price is down, had a real dud last week. Still saw 10 targets, only 4 rushes. Didn't lose a lot of the workload to Latavius Murray, but just wasn't as involved. And Tampa Bay's defense has been really good at stopping the run. They've been really one of the only teams that have stopped Christian McCaffrey relative to his performance. So where are you shaking out in this New Orleans offense?
Yeah, Tampa Bay is the pass funnel in the NFL. At 4-4, we have them ranked first against running backs when adjusted for strength of schedule, last against quarterbacks and wide receivers. They got rid of Vernon Hargraves, so now the worst cornerback on their team is Sean Murphy-Bunting, who's allowing the 9th most fantasy points per target, and that's who Michael Thomas is going to be lined up against. Michael Thomas, I mean, if one thing that like people are looking at ownership on Thomas, and you're not going to be contrarian with him, but one thing you can look at is like not just how you can get contrarian players or unique players, but how can you make a unique lineup? And I think one thing that you can try to do this week is try to make a lineup where you have Michael Thomas and Christian McCaffrey, because it's going to be very difficult to do, but you can get the 2 biggest boom players in the league, and if those guys go off, you're going to have the best players in the league with the most points and a very unique lineup. So I actually like Thomas. Like, yeah, I generally don't like eating the chalk on pass catchers, but Thomas, the only player in the league with 25% targets in every single game, the only player in the league with at least 16 DraftKings points in every single game. So he's been the model of consistency, and we know he has the upside. So I really like stacking this passing game. Drew Brees coming off of that horrible performance against equally bad Atlanta secondary. I think they look to rectify that. Alvin Kamara, if he's going to get it done, it's going have to be in the passing game. We need to see him get those targets. Obviously, he can do it. It's not so much that he had a down game for me that I'm concerned. It's the fact that he saw 57% of the backfield touches. Like, he wasn't getting that 80-85% that we saw earlier in the year. Obviously, coming off an injury, maybe they're trying to ease him in, but that's the concern there for me. And then just because of how concentrated Tampa Bay's passing game is, I think you could definitely run it back with either anyone on that pass game, any of the main guys, obviously Jameis, and then Godwin and Mike Evans. It's makes for a really nice game stack all around.
There's actually, TJ, I think something I might have seen on your Twitter, and I was just doing some research before the show, with Mike Evans and the correlation between when he has big days and when he doesn't, and when Godwin has a big days. I believe it was that Godwin has bigger days when Tampa Bay is in the lead or safely in the mix for the game. Evans has bigger days when they're behind, which logically makes sense. You would target the deeper receiver. We also have news Marshawn Lattimore is going to be out, officially ruled out yesterday, and he has been a bit of an inhibitor to Evans in the past. That secondary should be a bit worse. So which receiver of the two would you prefer this week? Because it does seem like a play from behind game, and now we know no Lattimore to really hurt Evans in the way that we've seen him hurt him in the past. So would you be wanting to go to Evans, or would you think this is more of a Godwin spot?
No, you nailed it, exactly what you said. I'm on the Evans side for sure, just because he is going to get the deeper targets. Like you said, they should be behind, and if that logic holds up, then that's the way to go for me.
Alex, how are you feeling about this Tampa Bay side and Evans and Godwin? Which of the Sophie's choice would you make there between those two? And also any Ronald Jones interest for you, given the fact that Bruce Arians really hyping him up as a route runner, even though those 8 catches and 8 targets he had last week are the most I think he's seen at any level in his football career.
Yeah, I'm not making too much out of that 8-target game. I think he's all right. On Yahoo at $14, that might be the price point I'll take a shot on Ronald Jones, but everywhere else his price went up big after last week. Evans and Godwin, because this is a little bit of a tough matchup for Tampa Bay, I think they're a little bit overpriced, and as a team, I think they have a pretty good chance of exceeding their ownership because Jameis is only projected for like 2.5%. So I think that if you can pay up to be contrarian here, that could easily win a GPP, but it is kind of a difficult lineup to build.
Also, one thing I noticed too, New Orleans defense, Alex, one of your better projected defenses in terms of your grades, which of course you do get with the Osmo membership at osmo.com/join. Jameis certainly turnover prone, also pretty bad under pressure. And New Orleans does a good job bringing pressure, 28% clip for them on the year. So Jameis going to be even more affected by that. Are you going to play any New Orleans defense this week as a fade, or does Lattimore being out change that equation for you a bit?
Yeah, I'm looking at the prices here. This $2,900 price on DraftKings seems pretty appealing. I would have expected them to be a little bit higher facing Tampa Bay, so that makes a nice play.
All right, and let's keep going here because we've luxuriated a bit too much, my fault, on some of these games. But here's a big game, a real big, real-life game, but not one which I feel like has seen a ton of talk in the DFS industry this week. Houston at Baltimore. Lamar Jackson's price is up. He's now appreciably more expensive than any other quarterback on all the sites. And this Houston side certainly going to have some struggles going against Baltimore's defense. Baltimore blitzes at a really high rate, one of the league's highest, just shy of 50%. We know that Deshaun Watson doesn't like getting blitzed because he does get sacked quite a bit, even though that sack rate's been down a little bit this year relative to last year. Still a quarterback who can take some hits back there. Not really any ownership expected here for anybody besides Lamar. So, TJ, I'll ask you first, in this game, who jumps out to you as being worthwhile? And would you pay up for Lamar in a week where people are really going to be going down to Kyle Allen and Derek Carr, who are much less skilled fantasy players, we could say that?
I think you have to think about paying up for Lamar pretty much every week at this point. He obviously has the safest floor of any quarterback in the league, save maybe Russell Wilson. Those are the only two guys with at least 14 DraftKings points in every game at their position. But Lamar's just getting it done. One thing I like to look at in my quarterback selections is like, where can I find some possible correlation between the passing games, and these are both this is going to be a highly correlated game in terms of the back and forth here. Obviously, one thing people can look at as a chink in Lamar Jackson's armor is that he hasn't been great through the air, but Houston is one of the worst secondaries in the league, and this is a defense that's trying to get better by adding Gary and Conley, who's like maybe the worst quarterback in the league. So if that's where you're at, then I want to play the quarterback playing that secondary. And the thing that I like about Lamar is, even if he is popular or you have to pay up, you can roll out a naked Lamar Jackson lineup. You don't have to feel like you have to stack him just because he can account for so much of that offense, and you're not going to lose much. But if you do want to stack him, Mark Andrews in a week where tight end I think is just really ugly. There, like I said, there's arguably the 5 best players at the position aren't on the main slate after Andrews' ugly 3-target game a couple weeks ago, bounced back with 38% of the target share last week. So I like, if you are going to stack Lamar, I like pairing him up with Mark Andrews, and I just like game stacking this game, both passing games. You've got Watson on that side, who's been very efficient. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins getting a huge target share over there too.
Alex, how are you feeling about this Baltimore passing game going against Houston? They have defended the run pretty well. I don't know if that'll apply for a quarterback, but they have limited teams to under 85 rushing yards per game, giving up almost 280 passing yards per game, and a pretty decent completion rate too. So maybe we see more of passer Lamar here. Where are you shaking out with Lamar this week as the highest price quarterback and also one of the higher owned ones?
I really like Lamar Jackson in cash. I mean, he just rushes for so many fantasy points that really gives you advantage over any other quarterback, and he gets it done all right and through the air, averaging pretty good numbers, close to 8 yards per attempt this year, so that's pretty good. With the part where I'm having trouble getting to him in GPPs is because Marquise Brown is just incredibly expensive for kind of the role he has, as well as Mark Andrews. These guys are quite pricey this week, and you are at a little bit of a disadvantage if you don't stack, because hitting your wide receiver on a big day is like pretty hard to do. So having that 2-for-1 really gives you a little bit of an advantage. So every week I go out and say I'm not that high on Lamar, and then I end up having him a ton though. So I mean, that could be this week, but I think it is a little bit worse than previous weeks.
That makes sense. And the Houston side for you, Alex, anybody jumping out to you as being worthwhile? I mean, Kenny Still's going to be pretty unknown, but he's still going to be getting that Will Fuller role. Will Fuller out one more week at least. And maybe he benefits a bit from the attention that Baltimore should be paying to DeAndre Hopkins. And you think maybe still see some advantages there going against a guy like, well, I don't know if they'll see much Marcus Peters, but a guy who gambles seems like you'd benefit for Stills. So any of this Houston side appealing to you in particular?
Yeah, you called it. Kenny Stills. I think that with Will Fuller out, his role being on the field most of the game is pretty locked in. He's been really productive this year on both getting targets and what he's done with them, and he's cheap. So the ownership, I'll have to wait and see, because Will Fuller just got ruled out. I think people were expecting him to play, so probably we'll wait until Sunday to see how that shakes out.
We're not going with a Carlos Hyde price pivot off of Brian Hill.
It's interesting.
I mean, Joe Mixon got 30 carries against Baltimore, so maybe Carlos Hyde gets that. That's how the transitive property works, right, guys? But yeah, I think I'm most intrigued by Stills on that side, but we'll see. I think this game is more interesting than we're probably giving credit for. At least the ownership is giving credit for. And we'll find out. But it also could be a defensive one, so there is some risk there. A game that we just saw a couple weeks ago is now back for us. Arizona at San Francisco. San Francisco coming off of its first loss. George Kittle not expected to play here. Emmanuel Sanders looks like he'll be a go. I don't think we're going to have Matt Breida, though I didn't double-check that news. But I'll ask TJ, you first. How are you feeling about San Francisco here in this spot? A pretty good team total for them, but Jimmy Garoppolo maybe not the most trustworthy, though he did have his best game of the year fantasy-wise and real-life-wise going against Arizona.
Yeah, I think if we look at who's going to be owned on that San Francisco side, looks like there's a lot of people trending towards Deebo Samuel after he's seen his targets go up the last couple of weeks. And then with Matt Breida out, obviously Tevin Coleman with San Francisco is big favorites. But I think it's kind of an interesting play to look at Jimmy Garoppolo because he is playing against this really bad Arizona secondary who's allowed 300 yards in 4 of their past 5 games, third most fantasy points per pass attempt allowed on the season. And like you said, Jimmy G had his best game of the year 2 weeks ago against this team. So if you're going to be on Deebo, a unique way to get him in your lineup is to pair him with Jimmy G. He's a price pivot off of Dak and Deshaun Watson, who should draw some decent ownership. So it's not the worst play. I can't see myself touching anyone on the Arizona side, though, especially with that committee backfield all of a sudden.
Alex, how are you feeling about this game here? Would you want some San Francisco? Do you think that TJ might be on the right track here with a low-owned Jimmy G going against a team that he just had a monster game against 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, I like the logic there, because if Deebo Samuel is highly owned and Jimmy Garoppolo is not, then you can get an advantage over all those lineups by stacking them up. And Emmanuel Sanders makes a nice play. I mean, it's hard to know like how healthy he is, but if you assume a full go with George Kittle out, that's a pretty appealing spot. You got some other guys on the team too, maybe like Ross Dwelly, who might not see enough targets to really be in consideration, but Tevin Coleman, I think without Breida, as TJ mentioned, that's also a good spot.
Yeah, Ross Dwelly getting that Arizona tight end funnel, probably not as involved as George Kittle would be, but still a 41% DVOA boost to tight ends according to Football Outsiders for Ross Dwelly this week. I have to ask about it, even though, TJ, you mentioned, and I'm with you on your side with the not wanting to play Arizona guys, but Christian Kirk did just go nuts last week, a much better matchup for him, and also one that a lot of the field was on because it was such an obvious good matchup. This week going against San Francisco, I just want to circle back. I know you gave your answer already, TJ, but no Christian Kirk for you?
Don't chase the points. Like if people are chasing the points on like him and Rojo are the obvious, like don't chase the points this week. So I'm not going either of those guys.
Alex, same thoughts for you?
Yeah, I mean, just a really tough matchup. So I'm not really on Kirk.
Yeah, I would agree. Tough defense outside against San Francisco, and Kirk, he's a really good player. I think he's going to have big weeks, but not this one versus San Francisco for me, especially on the road. Let's keep going here. Dallas at Detroit. Ezekiel Elliott going to be really low owned in a spot where I think they're going to feed him the ball pretty well, but I didn't land him a lot in crunches so far, so I'm curious how that goes. Dak Prescott also pretty well priced in a nice spot against Detroit's defense. Really has had a hard time defending both the pass and the run on the year, and also giving up a lot of plays per game, almost 68 plays per game allowed by Detroit's D. On the other side, Detroit going to have Jeff Driscoll out there, who I thought acquitted himself pretty well against Chicago. I am a Driscoll fan. He did well for me a couple times last year on the Bengals, and I think they really didn't inhibit him in a meaningful way relative to what Stafford does. He did throw some deep passes, a little bit less yards per attempt, but still had 4 targets of over 20-plus yards. I'm intrigued by the spot for Driscoll. I know he's the crappy quarterback of the week. I do love a crappy quarterback. So, Alex, I'll ask you first. Jeff Driscoll, is he in any of your lineups this week, do you think? Maybe a Detroit stack?
I'd like to tell you yes, because, I mean, being from Michigan, I would love to have my Lions stacked. But what we tend to see with these backup quarterbacks is they tend to check it down more. And these guys, it looks like they haven't really seen their prices fall without Stafford. I assume they were priced based on the idea that Stafford might play this week. And for that reason, it makes it pretty difficult to build a lineup with them.
TJ, you getting any Lions here? J.D. McKissick, also a guy who's looked pretty good on the year, a smaller back, but he's been really effective when he's actually getting the touches. And Ty Johnson still in the concussion protocol. I don't think we've gotten news on him yet unless I missed it. Any of these Lions look appealing to you, TJ?
Yeah, I think right before we jumped on, I saw something come across Twitter that said Ty Johnson is a full go. But yeah, I got to be honest. Before I saw the show sheet, I hadn't looked at Jeff Driscoll once all week. I like the Dallas side of it, but Dallas they're allowing really low quarterback efficiency. Their defense is top 6 in fantasy points per tip allowed in terms of favoring the defensive side of it. And yeah, I mean their running game is one that I'm not really touching. They've actually, after the last 6 weeks of the season, they've actually been one of the most pass-heavy teams in terms of neutral game script. One of the reasons Stafford's been effective is because he's had some of the best efficiency in the league, top 3 in fantasy points per attempt. I don't think Driscoll can match that. So I like the Dallas side. Haven't looked at the Detroit side in terms of someone I'm considering.
Okay, yeah, so I'll just say real fast for Driscoll, since apparently me and Jeff are the only guys that believe in him this week, but 46 attempts last week, and again, he almost had 20 fantasy points against Chicago. That to me is not a small number. In Dallas, I'm a Cowboys fan, and I know well from years of this, having not remembered their Super Bowl wins, only remembering the trauma since. They do tend to play down to competition. We saw it that 1 week versus the Jets where they suddenly looked like they could give up production to anybody, and I think Driscoll is competent enough to be worth a few stabs. To me, the 2.3% ownership we have for him seems fair, and I did think that they gave him some opportunities to make plays happen. So we'll see. But the more relevant side is the Dallas side, 27 implied points for them. TJ, I'll ask you first. Any love for any of these guys here? Amari Cooper, Ezekiel Elliott coming off of a spot where you think they want to feed him the ball and get him going, because that was a pretty high-profile, embarrassing spot for him against Minnesota.
Yeah, actually, they're probably one of my favorite team stacks this week. Dak's been very efficient. Detroit has just been bad all around. They're one of 2 teams that we have ranked outside the top 20 in fantasy points allowed against every skill position when we adjust for strength of schedule. So you can pass very efficiently versus them, and that's going to lead to a lot of red zone and goal line trips. That's obviously going to benefit Zeke, who he's seen the volume that we expect from Workhorse. He's right around like 45% of the team touches. The only people that are going to be higher than that are like the Christian McCaffreys, really. So he's getting a ton of the work in this offense. I think you can do like a Dak, Zeke, and Amari stack, and a lot of people don't like to pair their running backs with their quarterbacks, but I think this is a spot that you can do it if you want to get contrarian with this game stack.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alex, how are you feeling about the Dallas side here going against a Detroit team that gives up over 400 yards per game? And as TJ mentioned, bad pretty much equally versus the run and the pass.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential there. Amari Cooper is pretty reasonably priced, and he makes a really nice pairing with Prescott. So I think that's an option I'll probably go to a decent amount. Michael Gallup, a little bit more expensive than I might like, so maybe I just leave it at those 2. Ezekiel Elliott, as a guy who took some chances that he'd end his holdout and drafted him very high in season long, I've been really disappointed this year because they're just not throwing to the running back position that much. He's only getting targeted about 15% of the time that he's out there running a route. And that's not really putting him in the same league as guys like McCaffrey. On some sites, he's closer to that top salary than others. Like on FanDuel, he's $8,400, so that's pretty good. But on the other sites, he's quite expensive. So I think I could fade him this week.
All right, that seems fair. I was going to cover the New England and Philadelphia game. We're running a little low on time, so I'll ask you guys first. TJ, I'll ask you since you are the guest. Any players or games we didn't hit on that you feel like we should talk about with people that you feel like you have a pretty strong opinion on one way or the other?
I think people are probably going to want to look at that Buffalo passing game just because Miami is so bad all around on defense, but Josh Allen just hasn't been a quarterback that I'm really looking to in GPPs this week. So that's one that I think people might get excited about, but end up disappointed.
Yeah, that hurts me. Allen really has not taken the leap this year, and they've for probably to their credit because they are winning with him not doing that. But he's definitely not taking advantage of really good matchups in a way where you'd want to see. Maybe this is the week, but I'm on your side, TJ. I don't think so. Alex, how about you? Any games or players we haven't hit on that you feel like we should bring to the people before we do our contrarian plays and fades of the week?
I'll throw out Jacksonville here facing Indiana. I think that Fournette hasn't been on the main slate in a while, but he's one of my favorite guys to go to on a weekly basis because he does get a large percentage of the work in the running and passing games. So he has a nice price point across the industry this week. and Nick Foles coming back from the IR, he's really, really cheap. And there's some interesting options, at least, with Westbrook and Chark to pair him with. So I could see myself taking some stabs on them, too.
You would think, too, that Foles being more of a deep throw passer, at least them allowing him to deep throw more, and that the very limited sample size we saw of Foles, that you could see more goal line work for Fournette, which has really been his main flaw. He's not getting a lot of rushes within the 5-yard line, but you could see DJ Chark touch down within the 5 a couple times, and then maybe that's where Fournette gets a little more value. So yeah, that would be that, I think, and I agree. New England, just real fast for me, I think is an interesting play here. Tom Brady in this spot, there's been some reports out of New England outlets about him still really holding a grudge over that Super Bowl win. And I think the way we saw Julian Edelman and Sanu being used, Philadelphia's run defense has been really good. I think it could be a spot where they funnel towards the pass. If that is the case, we could see really big games for Edelman and Sanu. So I'm intrigued by the Brady stack of those guys. TJ, I'll ask you first. Would you think that there's any New England love this week for you as a stack going into Philly?
Just because they are that pass funnel, I think you have to consider it. The concern with New England is always there's just going to be so much variance in that offense. The touchdowns, the touches get spread around so much. It's very easy for Sony Michel and James White to each have a touchdown. Like they can score 30 points and Brady can get 1 touchdown. So that's obviously the concern. But Edelman does lead the league in red zone targets in the last 6 weeks. So that's definitely something to consider.
Alex, any love for you for New England this week?
Yeah, I think New England every week is pretty appealing as far as some of the skill positions, at least. So James White is a guy that's been really intriguing this year because he seems to get the same points every single week. But I know that isn't something that will happen going forward. So maybe on certain sites like FantasyDraft, where he's 9,400, maybe he'll go under the radar. And then you guys mentioned Edelman. I think he's a great play too.
All right, it's that time, guys. So hit the like button because right now these picks we're going to give are only going to be as accurate as the amount of likes we have. That's just the math. That's how it goes. And, of course, real fast shout out to FantasyDraft.com. They are, of course, the official home of rake-free DFS. Go to FantasyDraft.com and use that promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for your free week and your free entry into the world of DFS, in which all contest entry fees are paid to the winner. So go check them out. All right, TJ, you're the guest here, so I'll give you the first crack. Who would be your contrarian QB pick for Week 11?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Jimmy Garoppolo. I think there's just so many good quarterback plays that it's going to be hard for him to even hit like 5%. So, like we said, with people on Debo, with people on Tevin, Jimmy G's the low-end guy that I'm looking at this week.
Alex, who would be your contrarian QB pick?
Kind of like the Finley pick we talked about earlier, but I'll throw out someone who's a little bit lower owned here with Kirk Cousins. This game versus Denver has one of the lower totals of the week at 40, and Minnesota probably won't have to pass the ball a lot, but if Denver can get it going, Kirk Cousins has been well above average per play passing the ball. And with Thielen out, I think that Diggs makes a nice pairing with Cousins.
And I will go with Jeff freaking Driscoll for my pick because he's gonna be a guy who's gonna be in this game. I think we'll all be watching Red Zone and we'll see, Dallas is trailing 24-28 because Jeff Driscoll's run for a touchdown and thrown 2, and it'll be one of those days where maybe he's not the best play, but god damn it, he's gonna be in the mix. Alex, contrarian running back pick for Week 11, who would it be?
Ooh, I did not put enough work into this, but this one is more site specific, but I'm kind of interested in Darius Geis coming back from the IR here. We saw at the start of the season that Adrian Peterson didn't even get active while Geis was in the mix here. And I think that there's definitely some risk that they'll ease him in, and Washington isn't that great a team, but they're facing the Jets. Not the greatest rushing matchup versus Jets either, but I think there is potential that exceeds the salary here.
TJ, who would be your contrarian running back pick for Week 11?
It's really hard to get away from the chalky running back this week, but I think you could make a case for Devin Singletary. Buffalo favored by 6.5. I said I don't like that passing game, but I do like the running game. Obviously, they've split up the touches a little bit, but Devin Singletary trending towards being the main guy there. 68% of the backfield touches 2 weeks ago, 58% of the backfield touches last week. Buffalo's top 10 in neutral run rate. Miami 30th against running backs when adjusted for strength of schedule. Singletary's pretty very affordable and someone that I don't think people are really going to be on this week.
All right. And for me, I'll go Joe Mixon. I think I'm intrigued by the amount of workload he got. It does seem like maybe they want to give him that workload to keep the onus off of Ryan Finley a bit. He's going against an Oakland team who doesn't get a lot of good pressure. I think it's a spot where maybe you can get going here and maybe keep that game competitive. And TJ, back to you for your contrarian wide receiver pick. Who would it be?
Yes, team we haven't really talked about at all. Cortland Sutton, 44% of the target share in Brandon Allen's first start. That's obviously not a sustainable target share, but it does kind of nod to the fact that he's going to be Brandon Allen's guy. Denver, they're 10-point underdogs, so they should have to throw quite a bit. Cortland Sutton, 1 of 7 players with at least 20% of team's targets in every game over the last 6 weeks. And Xavier Rhodes has really struggled this year, bottom 12 in terms of fantasy points per target allowed. So you don't want to always just go to a passing game because they're going to be trailing. That doesn't always work for the quarterback, but a lot of time it does work for the number one wide receiver. So this could be a spot where they're trailing. Cortland Sutton ends up with 9 for 120 and 1 just because they don't have anything else to do but throw.
Makes sense. Alex, who'd be your contrarian wide receiver pick?
I mentioned Diggs earlier, but I'll throw out another one here because of that. I think that maybe Devontae Parker, with Preston Williams out for the season, he should be the number 1 wide receiver on the team. It's a bad matchup versus Buffalo, and Miami is not that good to begin with, so there's some huge question marks here, but that's what makes him contrarian.
All right, and I'm going to go Jamison Crowder. The revenge spot's certainly nice, but just data-wise, this Jets offensive line cannot stop anybody, and that results in Jamison Crowder getting a little more work. And Washington's pass defense actually not that good, giving up over a 70% completion rate. So I do think we'll see a lot of checkdowns to Crowder, and I'm willing to pay his price after he's been around 20 fantasy points the last few games. All right, fade of the week. This is the fun one. Who is it going to be for you, TJ? Who are you going to put on the spot where if you are wrong, you'll hear from people?
Yeah, we talked about it up top. I'm not touching Derek Carr or that passing game at all. We laid out all the reasons. Oakland runs so much, they're going to be up big. Derek Carr just isn't really a ceiling quarterback, so I'm not touching him at all.
Alex, who would it be for you?
I am kind of on the same train of thought here as TJ. I'm off of Kyle Allen. I think that last week it was funny. He was my contrarian quarterback of the week, but now he's chalk. So this is a guy that he's averaged less than 7 yards per attempt this year, which is significantly below average. The matchup versus Atlanta is encouraging, but I don't think that he has nearly as high a chance of winning you a tournament as he is owned.
All right, and my fade of the week, this paid off last week. I'll go back to the well and hope it doesn't burn me with his price down. Alvin Kamara, just don't see him doing any better than McCaffrey did, and I don't see him getting as much of a workload as McCaffrey got on the games where he did perform better. So I think it's going to be a tough spot for him. He'll be my fade. All right, TJ, we always like to open the floor up to our guests because we appreciate you guys doing the show so much. Or you can plug everything you want, your high school highlight reel, your Twitter, whatever you want in your world. Let the people know.
Yeah, you can find all of my work is on 4for4. Check out 4for4.com or look up DFS MVP podcast. We launch that every Thursday, breaking down the main slate. Everything else is on Twitter at TJ Hernandez.
So go follow at TJ Hernandez now. And Alex, the floor is yours as well. Whatever you want to say to the folks as we part for this week.
TJ, thank you so much for being on the show. It was great talking some contrarian picks with you. Thanks FantasyDraft for sponsoring us once again. Their main event's one of my favorite places to play because you win more when you win. So you gotta love that. And thanks everyone for watching and supporting the site.
We appreciate all you guys watching. Hit that like button before you go. Thanks to FantasyDraft. Check them out right now with that promo code AWESOME to get your free week on there. And I'll be back tomorrow with our pal, the Chubster Josh Egelman. Who's he going to curse this week with his pick in our 100 yards and a TD picks? You can find out tomorrow morning, so tune in. We appreciate you guys watching. Wish you guys the best of luck in week 11. So good luck.